Thank you. Thank you, everyone, to join today this panel discussion session. My name is Tina Zhang Yanting. So I will be the moderator for this session. So I think, firstly, before we introduce the panelists, let me have a brief introduction of myself first. Okay, I'm currently the IR of Compal. Compal Electronics,仁宝电脑. I think probably some of you already know our company, right? So we are the technology hardware company. So we provide the IT product design and the manufacturing. Okay. So I joined the company in 2011. So I already have about 8-9 years experience in the company doing IR. Besides of IR, I also doing the media communication. And I also take care of the shareholder events. So that's my job in the company. Before the Compal, I was the sales side analyst. So I was the research analyst before I joined Compal. And I had a capital market experience for about 10 years experience before Compal. So that's myself. Okay, and then let's move on to give us an introduction of our today's panelists. So firstly, we have John Goya. So John already gave the presentation previously, but here is still some brief introduction for John. So John is the head of the sales at Meetyl, and he covered the Europe and Asia APAC regions. So background on Meetyl. Meetyl is a corporate assets technology company and provide a platform to support the direct engagement between the companies and the investors. Oh, that's welcome, John. Okay, and then the next speaker, we have Anthony Riha. So Tony is the vice president at ISS Corporate Solutions, so it's ICS. So Tony joined ICS in 2017, and he covered the Asia region. So Tony role in Taiwan emphasized the ICS data solutions and advisory strategies relating to successful AGM, EGM voting outcomes. And ICS, a new progress for Taiwan corporate issuers is they release the ISS environmental and social quality score reports. So that's welcome, Tony. Okay, lastly, we have Shannon Watson. So Shannon is the advisor of QIC. I think probably some of the audience here is already heard about QIC before, but still some background here. QIC is a Taiwan-based independent financial advisory firm specializing in corporate governance and the capital market advisory to create the long-term shareholder value. Okay, that's welcome, Shannon. Okay, I have to say, actually, today I'm very happy, excited to be here being the moderator. The reason why is that, I think most of the audience here, we are the IR of the company. Usually our role in the conference or in the meeting is that we always sit here and take questions, right? So investor asked a lot of a question to us, right? So we talk a lot. So I'm happy today is because I changed my role being the moderator. So I can ask as many of the questions to the panelists, okay? Okay, so and then let's move on to today's session topic. The topic is on how the data and the technology transfer in the IR practice, okay? Before we talk about the data and the technology, I think, firstly, I want to talk about what's the, right now, the IR practice right now. Because more simply say is that what's the daily IR work, okay, right now for the IRO. I think most of you know, right, the IR is a breach of the management team and outside external investors. So our daily IR work break down to, the daily work is that, we take a lot of the investor meetings, right? And we issue, regular, monthly, quarterly, the press release, and we attend the broker event, no matter it's the conference or corporate day or the overseas roadshow. And then more importantly is that, our daily work is also provide some important feedback from the internal investors back to the management team. For this kind of daily IR work, I think, first of all, we just to ask the panelists to give us some idea like what you see is the most important trend right now okay, could be change our daily IR work, in the future 1 or 2 years. Okay, or what is the IR practice right now? You already see the good practice in the other country, in the other region, but not yet happening in Taiwan, but probably will be coming soon. For this kind of trend, probably you can give some summary. We firstly start with John. John, I know you gave a presentation previously, but I think you still can give us some summarize on this topic, okay?
Sure. I'll be perfectly honest. I can't say much about the Taiwan market because this is my first time here. But from a general perspective, one thing that is happening around the world, obviously due to the regulation of MiFID II, which I think we'll be talking about, is the investor relations professionals are going to have to find more time to do some of the additional work that will be forced upon them, rather, as a result of the reduced amount of support that they're getting from the sell side. Now, certainly, as I mentioned in my presentation, not every company is created equal, so not every company will have that same impact of additional workload immediately, but it's certainly something that's worth keeping an eye out for.
Okay, great, John. Thank you for that. How about Tony? Tony, you give a presentation on the ESG. Right, so we know ESG is a very important trend, but beyond of that, is there any other important trend happen here?
Very much so. The voter modeling is more and more important almost weekly to Taiwan. It's in a highly attractive market to foreign institutional shareholders. As mentioned by Chairman Lean and Chairman Koo this morning, it's 40% plus. Part of the reasoning and the action plan behind the TDCC portal launch is to advance Taiwan's corporate issuers before the world. And so 2 things about it. In terms of the institutional shareholders, it used to be thought that it's a 1-month event. And it certainly is. Data is now a part of that more than ever. Voter modeling is critically important as regulations become more stringent in terms of director elections, tenure, independence, amending articles of incorporation, and then, of course, activist or what I'll call EGM type activity. But I will say again that the ESG quality score, that is an everyday, every hour assessment being used by the institutional shareholders to make decisions about their portfolio. And now they're not going to tell you that, they just do it. So the simple message would be the time is now, embrace the technologies, be on equal footing with the institutional shareholders, be ahead of your peers, be a leader, and that maximizes the positive view of the corporate issuer within the community.
Thank you, Tony. Shannon, you actually, I know GYC provide a lot of service in Taiwan, right, for Taiwan corporates, right? So I think probably you can share with in the Taiwan side that kind of experience. Thank you.
Yes, I think trends going forward, we obviously touched on the tools and the data changes. So I would probably point out the stewardship codes, so the rise of kind of stewardship codes around the world, and also that Taiwan now has 140 asset owners and asset managers that have signed on to the code. Now, I don't know, as IR, if you're seeing a lot of interaction yet from the domestic investors, but going forward, I believe this will start to be more of the case. And part of the stewardship code actually says that they should be monitoring their companies based on the environmental, social, and governance issues, and that is their responsible and their fiduciary duty to their beneficiaries to be monitoring the companies and also engaging with the companies. So not just engaging on the financials. Hopefully domestically, we're going to see the domestic investors also engaging on these other issues because it is non-financial or not just something that's nice to have. It's actually managing your risk, and the companies that manage this risk better are just better managed companies. So that's one big change I think we're going to see. And also from the other side, the stewardship side of the institutional investors. So the institutional investors are choosing the large firms. If you look at someone BlackRock, State Street, Norges Bank is a big investor here in Taiwan as well. They're focusing on key engagement issues each year. So State Street, actually, this year, they wrote a letter saying that their key engagement topic this year is going to be corporate culture. Now, a lot of times when I talk about governance and I say that, you can't talk about governance without talking about culture, culture seems such a vague thing to talk about, but they want to see that, you can't execute a strategy if you don't have the right culture. So that's one of the engagement issues that State Street's going to focus on. BlackRock also has corporate culture as one of their key focus. Human capital management. This is also a topic that is becoming more and more important, and that ties, again, directly into the culture. And each topic, APG has maybe climate change, human rights. Those would be the key topics they're focusing on this year. So all of these, as part of their stewardship engagement process, has areas that they're going to focus on. And so as companies, you need to be kind of aware of why they're asking these questions and how you can respond to that and how you can disclose information on that. I'd say the last trend would be you have to look kind of the millennials coming into 35% of the workforce. The changing in how they're investing also. There could be, some people are not investing in the equity market yet. How they do invest, though, they focus more on ESG issues as well. So kind of going forward, that's going to be also a big shift in trend, I think.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. Okay, so I think through those panel speakers, they talk, I think, few keywords here, right? So we heard about MiFID II. So they talk about like more engagement from the shareholders, and stewardship code in Taiwan, and of course the ESG. So I think for this panel discussion, we can further dig out some more details. So firstly, I want to talk about the MiFID II because we heard about this topic for the past 2 years a lot, right? But I still want to use it as IRO, the role. To ask the question is that because I give you the real example here is that I'm the IR of a compound, and right now I think the Taiwan corporate to facing the situation here, just like John you say, we have less and less resources provided by broker, right? So, for example, in the past, probably compound we have 10, 20. Analysts in Taiwan, actually, they cover compound, writing the research report. But nowadays, probably the writer from the analyst side probably is only 4 to 5, right? So it's reduced. And also for the most importantly is on the corporate assets, the event, right? So I think most of the company here also can observe that we see the trend of last corporate assets event raised by the broker. Last invitation, especially for the UK and the European market. I think that's especially because of the MiFID II. I think besides of that, probably is also because Taiwan actually right now we are in the competition with Hong Kong, China, right? So Hong Kong rising of the China technology company, so probably they also spread out some of the research analysts, their time and their resources. But also, meanwhile, at this time, we also found the trend here is that we start to get the more directly outreach by the investors. For example, we have our IR group email address. So I would say for the past of the years, we do get more and more this kind of direct email sending to our IR group email box and to request a call or request a meeting. I think that is the issue for the company IR is that some of the investor is quite well known. For example, if it's NoJS Bank, we all know that, right? It's a shorter, everyone know, they're very famous. But some investor they are not your shareholder, the investors you are not familiar with. So for that kind of situation in the past, you can rely on the broker, right? So you can get the background information from those investors and to know who they are, you want to talk with them or not. But nowadays it become more difficult. So I think for this kind of a real case, I want panel speaker, especially John, probably start with you. Can you talk about what is the good resources here? You mentioned about your platform, but can you give a more idea, detail on how IR can leverage this kind of resources, use this kind of resources to do the better, consistent engagement with the investors?
Sure. So I think to start, obviously it's important to know who your shareholders are and who you've met with in the past, so that if you can keep track of who you've met with. Even if you're getting reduced support from your brokers, you have that contact information, you can reach out to them directly. It's probably also important to understand from them how often they would like to see you. If your team isn't traveling to the United States and you have some top shareholders in New York and Boston that would like to see you, it may be worth looking for a way to find the time to make it out there if possible, because it's worth understanding how they see you and how often they'd like to meet with you. When you're searching for new investors to try and meet with, it's absolutely still important to reach out to your broker and speak to them to find out who they would suggest. But certainly take that with a grain of salt, because they're always going to have their own agenda. They certainly would like to get paid for supporting you on your roadshow. So that's where additional tools and additional functions can help. Many companies have some sort of CRM tool so that, as you mentioned, if an investor reaches out to you directly and you're not familiar with the firm, certainly look up the institution, see who they are. Do they invest in Taiwan? Do they invest in your peers? What metrics do they look at that are important to you to see if it continues to make sense? And that's important as well, because you don't necessarily want to be speaking to an investor that's simply doing a channel check on the region or on the industry. You want to make sure you can validate it. And I'm sure that's certainly why investor relations professionals might speak to the investors first before even considering bringing in any type of management. And then it goes beyond identifying and figuring out who you would like to see. How are you going to engage with them? Are you going to set up phone calls? Are you going to exchange emails? Are you going to provide information? Are you going to travel to meet with them? Understanding and having a plan of attack in terms of your level of engagement is certainly going to be useful. And if you are deciding to travel, making sure you understand where the investors are and how you're going to plan those meetings.
Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, actually, I think that's really true. So I want to add some color in the discussion here is that I think before we do the engagement in the corporate assets, the activities, I think firstly, definitely we need to know our shareholders, right? So I think currently a lot of the shareholder identification tools right now, resources available from many consultants there. So I think that might be very helpful for the IRO as a first step to understand your shareholder structure. But I also would like to share the one experience here is that because I know in Taiwan, not pretty much the company all have the budget, all have the resources to hire the consultant. Okay, so to the reality, I think the way we are doing right now is that actually we do use the consultant service that in the past, like one or twice in the past, but afterwards we can do some maintenance on this kind of shareholder analysis by the company ourselves. Okay, because you are the IR, you talk to your investors, right, every day, quarterly, right? So, if your shareholder structures not changing too much, actually IR also can be responsible to do that, to maintain that kind of a structure. But of course, if your shareholder structure varies a lot every year, probably you need some extra consultant there. And also, I think important that before you get on the roll is that you need to understand what's your shareholder ownership look like. For example, Compound, we are is more like the more like value and the dividend yield company. So we do have a lot of a shareholder which is value driven and the fixed income dividend driven. So when we go out for the conference and roadshow, we also will try to identify. We also want to meet more this kind of type of investor, because we think they are more fit of the company, the philosophy, and the company style. So if the investor which is in the growth area, so they are looking for like every year 30-40% that kind of a growth, so probably it's not so fit as our company. So I think start with the shareholder analysis actually is very important start point, right? So Tony, you want to add on some comments?
With respect to MiFID, that's not a service we provide. I think the baseline point is when you do your outreach, Give them a real tangible reason, give them something useful for their time in meeting with you, as opposed to a general, we want to give you an update or we want to walk you through a document. The points about knowing your shareholder group are exceptionally important in a go-forward sense for Taiwan issuers, because as the market is more appealing, there are going to be active, if not activist owners that are going to come into Taiwan, and they look for weakness in governance and in ESG to leverage their position. They may want a bigger dividend. They may want to eventually take seats on the board. So in addition to your longtime loyal investors, get to know your new ones, do your research on them, and then engage them. And even in contentious situations, transparency is good. It works to your advantage.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Very helpful. And then we want to follow up, because I think mostly right now we are talking is about, the company you already have the foreign shareholders, right? You already have the QV shareholders, and you already have the broker support in the past, but nowadays has been reduced. So now I want to ask Shannon, is that because I want to use the more small cap company point of view, is that if you are the small cap company, right now I think probably your first step is that you have zero support from the broker in the past. They don't have any coverage, and probably they also don't have too much invitation to the small cap company. And now you are the IRO of the company, and you get your homework from your boss saying that, I want the IR, we want you to give me the proposal that, how you can help us to have a more exposure to the foreign brokers and to get the higher ownership from the foreign brokers. So in this kind of a case, Shannon, probably can you share your experience on that, how the Taiwan corporate small cap company, they can do their first stop, right?
Right, yeah, and that's why we have a business for this exact reason. Yeah, I mean, we hear about, 40% foreign investors. There's going to be more and more foreign investors in the market. I mean, the reality of that is still that those foreign investors are invested in the larger mid-cap companies, right? And if you're not one of those top 71 companies out of 1,800 listed companies in Taiwan, then it's really, really hard to access and to get attention. And it's going to be even harder. So now with, if you're a small cap company, you never had brokerage support anyway. So, nothing has really changed. It just means that your job is just getting harder and harder. But, there are all these tools out there. There's tools now that you can use for corporate access. There's tools you can use to analyze your investor profile, do shareholder analysis. There are tools to manage your CRM. But there are a lot of different tools, and now you have, the good news, bad news. Good news, there's lots of tools. Bad news is it's a lot more work for you. So that's just the reality. You're going to have a lot more work because you're also looking at all of your disclosure as well on the ESG side, which a lot of IR end up being responsible for that, or your team is responsible for that. So that's a big challenge. I mean, so targeting investors is the first part. You really you have to identify who you want to meet with to target them. So that's using that. There's different tools you can use. You can look at your peers, who's invested in your peers. You can look at the type of investor. You can look at the size of their AUM. You can look at what industries they focus on, what market caps they focus on, and also their style. So what type are they? A yield investor? If you have a good dividend yield, you can target some yield investors. But the reality is, if you're a small cap company, you end up actually can only look at really, do they invest in small cap companies, right? So and do they invest in Taiwan? So because the Taiwan market is much harder, you really kind of come down to, when you're targeting investors, if you're a big company, you have lots of areas to find all these new investors. But if you're small, it really comes down to do they invest here, and what are they looking for? And then the next part is obviously communication, your story, your strategy. So if you don't have a long-term strategy to communicate, and you don't have kind of a key kind of selling point of why an investor should meet with you or see you, then it's going to be next to impossible, because you're competing with the capital not just in Taiwan of all these other companies, but all the emerging markets. So it is very, very challenging. So I don't necessarily have good news, I guess, but it just means that you do have to go out and they're not going to come to you you're going to have to be a lot more proactive in reaching out and trying to get meetings and trying to communicate. And that part, I think we'll talk a bit more about ESG, but that is part of it, because now the investors are using so many different kind of tools and AI to actually scrape all this information. So if you're posting on MOPS, they may be using algorithms to find the information from that. If you're issuing a press release, the wording in that may be interpreted in different ways. And with the rise of all these passive and quant funds that are investing, and that's just going to continue to grow. The numbers in the US right now, they say, I think it's about 29%. But Moody's Investor Service is suggesting that maybe 2024 it might be 50% of the U.S. market is actually invested in mutual funds and ETFs. So with that, you're seeing a big change. And so they're pulling out this information. So the more information you have out there and the way you're communicating it is very important, because they may be looking for predictive factors in the way that things are worded in your presentations and in your press releases. So that's something also to be aware of. So yeah, a lot more work, but it's possible. It is possible. There are people that there are investors that want to invest in small caps. They want to find that good story. So if you have a good management team, you have a long-term strategy, you have the ability to communicate that well, then there are opportunities. The capital is there, but it is challenging.
If I can add something very quickly. One thing I'd say, especially for small caps, when you're reaching out to investors never respond as quickly as you would like. So if you send them an email invitation and they don't respond, you need to understand how many emails they're probably getting throughout the day. So you may have to chase them and follow up, or maybe make a phone call to make sure that they got the invitation and that they responded. Because sometimes they have hundreds, if not thousands, of emails in their inbox. So something has to stand out with your email, with your invitation for a meeting, to ensure that they see it.
Right. So I think even for the big company, right? Sometimes we send an email to our shareholders, for example, like during the AGM season, they're also very busy. It's not easy to get their reply, right? And I also want to follow up Shannon, because you mentioned like small cap company, but I think who speak out actually is also matter, right? Because my understanding is that for some more mid to large cap company, probably you have a more established IR team. So probably you do the conference, you do the roadshow, you have a dedicated IR people. But for some small cap company, probably the management team, the CEO, president, probably is the best person to do the roadshow, to come out to present the company. Is that true?
I mean, there's always a strength. If you're going to have, the chairman or the president or CEO, any senior management speaking to the investors, that's an advantage. So in that case, small cap companies actually have an advantage, because investors would prefer to speak with, the decision makers than speaking with the IR team when they have that opportunity too. So, if you do have your president, your CEO going on the road, then they may be more likely to take the meetings. So.
Right. Thank you. And also you mentioned, I think that's also related to the company culture you mentioned, right? If, the investor want to feel your company's culture, probably talk to your management team, probably is also the easy way, right? Okay. Then let's move on to the second topic I want to further discuss is the ESG, because we also heard a lot about ESG part. And actually, I want to share some experience here. Some example here is that I think that's true, right? As a company IR, I can feel that for the past of years, our work is getting harder and harder, because the content we need to communicate actually getting more and more complicated, right? I think in the past, as an IR, probably most important to communicate with the PM, is on the company strategy, product progress, a lot of the financial numbers. So most of us, our background actually is a financial background. But nowadays, actually, I do feel, I get some investor meeting. At the end of the meeting, the PM, so it's not the governance people, actually it's the PM. Actually, they also ask some ESG questions, right? At the end, probably they just ask you that, Compound, right now, what's your top 3 focus in the ESG area? Because ESG is too broad, right? Too much topic. They just want you to give us a free identify area. What's your company key focus? And also, we get the investor, they're asking us more on the governance side, like what's your board, right? The board diversity and the board composition, that kind of a discussion, want to know more. So I think what I do right now is that because, I'm, of course, IR, like myself, actually I'm not the expert of the CSR, but company, actually we do have a CSR committee, so we have a CSR team. So what I do is that actually I co-work with our CSR team. So we prepare another separate presentation deck, okay? So which is content the environmental, social, and the government highlights that what we did. Nothing too much, probably 3-4 pages highlight. But right now, when I'm meeting with some UK and the European investors, usually I bring that with me because just in case they ask this kind of a CSR ESG questions. So I want to ask Tony first, right? So can you help us to understand, right? I know you rolled out a new initiative on the ENS platform, but how you help your client to have a better communication in the ESG side?
Okay, so for the institutional investors, there's a commonality, and then there's custom policy that goes along that as well.
Right.
But there are global standards that drive it to a commonality, to a point. Key would be to know out of the thousands and thousands of ESG touch points, which are the ones that actually are meaningful in an investment sense to any given institutional shareholder. So getting a hold of the underlying data, the underlying questions. I'd mentioned before, doing your data verifications for MSCI for anyone that is requesting that you update your information, and not all of them have good methodologies. There's a famous company out of Europe called IRCM, and when they write these very highly critical reports out of 6,000 companies, it's an A to F scale, and no company gets an A. And you look what's taking place in Asia, and all the companies are downgraded, and part of that is because they sent it to ir@company.com and never got a response, and so there's omissions. So do your data verifications. In terms of the Taiwan market, the attractiveness, one thing I'll share with you is that it's my choice to launch this here. And I was speaking with the Hong Kong Exchange the other day. This isn't confidential information, and they were like, "Why do you choose Taiwan? We wanted to be first." And but the reality is there's significant opportunity here. Taiwan scores exceptionally well in the environment categories. In terms of the S, social, there's supply chain issues, whatever the case may be. There's still work to be done. But in terms of the ESG, if you can do it, find out what the underlying data points are, find out the questions, make sure that you have the correct information into these various systems, and that will serve you well. And then again, part of what we do is ESG improvement, and so there are tools where you can run what-if models to, if you want to shore up a specific area. It's my sales pitch, sorry.
Thank you, Tony. Actually, Tony mentioned the ESG improvement area. Actually, I do want to do some marketing for him. That is for free, right? Because I think the last time when Tony demoed their tool to me on their, how their rating, and I think most surprised me actually is that, in the past, actually as an IR, actually we already get too much information, which is on the ESG rating, right? So we have DJSI, we have MSCI, when we have sustainability analysis. So a lot of like ESG rating scores, but sometimes we are still lack of some feeling, right? It's like our rating here, and they tell you your peers rating is there, okay, and then so what? So and then how we can improve ourselves. So I think ICS right now, their tool actually, I think what surprised me is that they can do some analysis for you. For example, like compile right now your score for example, if you are 6, okay, and then your peer probably is a 5, and then if you want to improve yourself from 6 to 5, 5 is better, right? And then you need to do some extra work. So they identify, right now you already do the ABC, but you're not yet doing DEF, right? So if you do DEF, and then you can improve to the better score. So I think that is the, and then as an IR, we have a feeling, right? So just like you're a student, right? And your teacher telling you, you still have 3 questions you need to answer, right? So I think that's useful, right? So they give you a specific area to improve. And then their system also provides some example, right? The good example, if you want to do the extra 3 items, they have other company, what they do, then the role model, their example there. So if you want to improve your disclosure, so you can as a reference. So I think probably I just add on some color. I think that's quite useful to me.
Okay, yeah, and one thing I might add, because it sounds very complex and involved, once your initial data verifications are done, and that does take a few hours, because again, you have to answer 350 questions and verify the information, but once that is in place, you can have complete control of your ESG report, and the investment is 1 hour a month. That's how efficient the technology is. So it's actually a time-saving tool for a report that is read by institutional investors every day.
Okay, cool. So for this topic, any other speakers you want to add on? Shannon?
Yes, I think from a larger company. So if you're above $2 billion U.S. market cap, you're going to be getting these emails from Orcom, from Sustainalytics, from MSCI. Do respond to those. Do read those reports, and do actually give feedback if you see anything that you want to add more information, or if you want to communicate a bit better. For most of these, it requires public information. So if you don't have this information public, that's going to be the first step. And that can be on the website. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your CSR report. One of the things that we say to our clients, number one, is your website is your tool to communicate any message you want to communicate. So why not use that? You have complete control over that, so use that to get data, information. You don't have time maybe to publish, a full ESG report at GRI standards, but you can communicate information that's material. And so I want to focus on that, is the material issues for your company. So QIC is part of the ICGM, which is the International Corporate Governance Network. And so I attend conferences about 2 or 3 times, 4 times a year, speaking with investors and kind of seeing what the trends are and what they want companies to communicate. And the number one thing they say is, listen, I'm not going to read your 200-page ESG report. Really, let's be honest. I can't do that for every company, especially not for companies that I have a tiny holding in. But what I want you to be able to communicate, and what I want the corporate to focus on, are the material issues. And thankfully, SAS, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, you can go online and type in SASB. And you can see they've actually done what material issues are for every industry. And so you can go on and you can see, what industry, you can do this materiality map they have, and it will tell you what is important to investors. So they've spent years kind of creating this and talking to investors to see what are the issues in your industry. So for example, if you're in industrials, right? Health and safety, employee safety, that's going to be number one. That's a material issue that affects the long-term value. Also, obviously, energy emissions. That is, material in a lot of cases, but definitely in chemicals and in the industrial areas. If you're obviously in the internet side, customer privacy, the data. Also, human capital. So because there's a war for talent. So those are material issues. So if you're going to communicate with investors, those are the ones they want to say. So I think Tina mentioned that at the beginning. At the end, the investor said, what are the 3 material issues? And they want you to know as a company. As a company, you should also know. You may disagree with what the industry standards are, but as a company, you should understand what are the material issues that affect our long-term sustainability. And the reason they're asking these questions, the reason why ESG is important is because it is talking about whether you're going to be in business in the future. They're looking at long-term, metrics to see this. So I read this morning that actually Norges Bank they've created this new proprietary software platform where they are pulling in non-financial information, combining that with trading information and earnings information, and they are actually predicting whether this company is going to be in business in the long term. And so they're actually divesting from some companies where they say that, you know what, this business model is not a long-term business model based on some of these non-financial issues or material issues. So Norges Bank is one of the ones that does divest from coal, from tobacco. They do divest from these companies. But you have to look at, what are the material issues, and, can you be in business? If some of these risks happen, will you still be in business? And that's the question that management should be asking, and when you're looking at the company. So I would like to see the kind of conversation not be, how do we get a better score, which is important, absolutely, because there's this push and pull, I think, that, Mr. Koo spoke about this morning. There definitely should be the push from the investor side. This is what investors want. But from the company side, it should be this is actually about what is material to our company and is good for the company. If you go through all of these questions, there's a lot of them, right? The 350 questions. But if you go through these, it's actually a management tool. And if you're not tracking your employee retention as a manager, that's a big issue, right? So if you don't have some of this data, that's where you start, is why aren't we tracking this data? How can we manage our company if we don't have this data available, right? So that's kind of the starting point. But a lot of small cap companies come to say, well, it's just so much. Like, where do we start? Start with 4 material issues, 3 material issues, and publish information and metrics on that. And make sure you have long-term metrics. So what investors say is they can't really dictate, if you give them a number, that means nothing, really. What they want to see is how are you progressing against that number. So set a target, 5 years, 3 years, 10 years in the future, and then every year report on the progress towards that. And then an investor can see, oh, okay, well, maybe they're not perfect, but they actually have a plan and they're working towards it. So that's where I would say to start.
Thank you, Shannon. It's very helpful.
And I just, very quickly, I'd say the last thing I would say is make sure you understand who you should be speaking to about these issues at the institutions and how they weight it. So, for example, you might be speaking to a portfolio manager that's interested in ESG, but is every one of your shareholders where the PM and analyst is looking at that? Or is it another team? Is it part of the stewardship team? So having an understanding of who you should be actually reaching out to and understanding how they evaluate for your existing shareholders is certainly going to be important as well.
Right, that's true, that's true. And I think the other one to follow-up question here related to ESG, because I heard in the morning session, there is some proxy advisory. They say that starting from this year, probably proxy advisory, we're going to incorporate the ESG into their a voting recommendation. So help me to understand, because I don't really understand how is that going to work out. So are they going to reference some a MSCI or some rating data and to put some comments in their proxy report, and according to that, to give the for and against on their report? So, Tony, can you? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. So it comes down to 2 drivers, and it usually starts in the West first. So what we're seeing in the U.S. and Europe is that there are many more proposals that are ESG driven.
In the AGM.
Right, in the AGM.
Okay.
Right, exactly. But the plan is to basically take this E&S quality score report and attach it to the proxy report, so it's kind of like a double dip for the institutional shareholders to take a look. ISS Research, again, that's our parent company. They've been producing what is called governance quality score for the better part of 10 years, and that is not yet launched in Taiwan. It's like throughout the rest of Asia, but it's not in Taiwan. They've been attaching those to the proxy reports, but it's basically, so for Taiwan, starting next year, they are going to be attaching your E&S score to your proxy report, and then it's kind of an all-encompassing type of environment for the various committees to cast votes.
For the company, if they don't have a ESG-related agenda, so how that gonna to impact their, the advisory comments?
Well, it would come down to more practice. No one's going to vote against a director because you have an environmental situation or something along those lines. But they will be looking for direct ties. And I would think at the beginning, the impact on actual for and against recommendations would be cautious, to be consistent with the past, and the same thing with the voting result. By attaching this information, they're trying to give investors and voters a view, an overall view of the company, because if you look at governance, it varies widely around the world. That's why a lot of the benchmarking that is done by various agencies is regionally scored. ESG is globally scored, and so that's why there's going to be a big emphasis on including that as an all-in, so to speak.
Okay, thank you, Tony, for your insights. And then I think it's pretty much for the ESG part. And then I want to move on the other keywords I think people mention is about the activism. Okay, because I think through a lot of the presentation, we also know activism become more and more popular. But I want to share our experience is that actually our company, we don't really have activism investor. Thanks God, right? So it's fortunately. But I think reality is that we do see more and more which is governance active investor. So they are not really activism, but they are the active investor. In the past, they are, we are familiar with this PM, right? They are active, the PM, so they come over to you, ask a lot of company strategy, financial things. But nowadays, especially for the past 2 years, we do have this kind of shareholder. So because, they already own your shares. So they will, for example, send the letter to the company every year, annually, to outline their AGM voting guidelines, and also to outline what's their view on the company, their management, okay, on some specific area, for example, on your board composition, on how you manage your balance sheet, cash, these kind of things, and also how the company, your employee bonus, that kind of issue, that kind of a thing. So they send this kind of a letter to company. Actually, to be honest, the first year we get this letter, actually we're very nervous. We don't know, this kind of investor, what they're gonna to do. But then we realize that they just want to have a more engagement with the company to open the dialogue, right? And also we have shareholders, we have a board election year, so they initiate by themselves, they say that, hey, I want to have a conference call with the company, so tell me more about your nominee members, their diversity, and also their composition. So, and tell me what's their expertise, and their executive or non-executive, this kind of etc. So we do see this kind of a trend. So I think probably panelists you can share here is that, for the company, if you're facing this kind of increasing active investor shareholder situation, how you can help, or any data analysis can help the company IR or company management to know, firstly, is to know the shareholder well, okay? And then I think the second question is that how can you help them to have a better communication with them, okay?
I can touch on that. Certainly this is going to be more talking about Meetyl, right? Because,
right.
Within the technology, first of all, it certainly shows you who you should be reaching out to, because we have the database of corporate governance contacts that would likely be doing the stewardship engagement. It also includes kind of what you mentioned, the policy guidelines and rules of engagement, which you can certainly find on the websites. And I see we have 3 minutes. I will speak very fast. Our tool pulls that information into the system so you don't have to go looking for it, along with the voting history that we have on record. The last thing that I would say is it's still certainly important to engage with your proxy advisors, such as ISS and Glass Lewis. On Meetyl itself, you can actually request a meeting with Glass Lewis, and they engage with companies using our technology. But certainly just making sure you have access to the information in an easy source.
Okay, that's cool. Shannon.
I'll just quickly add. I think also the thing is to not look at we talked about active investors or activists, right? Either way, companies immediately will go on the defensive in general. So immediately, we kind of go in, kind of put your head in the ground and say, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to address these issues. But the fact is that these investors are obviously looking to gain value. They're only addressing these issues, or they feel there's issues that are actually going to improve the share price, because that's why they're invested, right? Everyone at the end of the day wants to see, the value improved. For active investors, sometimes, it may be more ESG related, but have a conversation. This is free advice. This is someone who's analyzed your company, done a lot of research, so why not sit down and hear what they have to say and take it back to the board? You don't have to agree, and you don't have to implement it, but you do, I think, have a responsibility to sit down and have a conversation and see what they have to say, because if they've done all this research and done all this analysis and they're invested in your company, and there is a way to actually increase that value, then why not do that? Why not bring that back to the board and say, hey, I've got this great idea. It came from an investor, but maybe it would work and maybe it will help. So I think don't just ignore it. Have a conversation, have a dialogue, and you ultimately decide whether you think that's good advice or something that you can change or implement.
Thank you, Shannon. Tony.
Very, very quickly. Pardon me. As a corporate issuer, keep improving your company, because activists look for weakness that they try and exploit. A catastrophic example that's taking place now is outside of Taiwan, but it's Hyundai in South Korea that's having a very public battle with Elliott Management. And these activist owners, they use, pardon me, these unbelievably sophisticated tools, websites, YouTube channels, and everything else to present their case, and they're very smart about how they go about gaining shareholder support, and what they're trying to do is get seats on the board, or in what they did in the case of Hyundai is they found that they were sitting on cash and then just went for it. And for a company like Elliott Management, which is probably the prototype activist right now, if you just went to Google Elliott Management, you would get a list of how they go into companies, and within 2 years, flip their investment and capture 68%, something along those lines. In Taiwan, what we're seeing more of right now, because of the change in the Company Act, is within the board dissident shareholder proposals becoming quite popular. That maybe someone on the board doesn't like a particular aspect, and they take action, and then maybe they try and take more control of the company. But if you keep improving your data points, it's going to make you less attractive to investors that you don't want, and more attractive to people who would stay with you as part of a relationship.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I think I want to add some extra very quickly here is that I think there is also one tool could be very useful. It's just TDCC, their voting database, because usually when I has this kind of a request from the shareholders, my first step is actually go back to see what's the historical voting result. This shareholder, they vote for the company. For each agenda, they vote for or against or abstain. And for the past board election, do they support for the company? I think probably that is also the easy way, and is most available way for the IR to get some very basic understanding about this investor and the shareholders, their behavior. Okay, I think we are pretty much here. Probably we just open for the question for the audience. Is there any audience have a questions?
I have a question here.
Okay, so over there.
I have a question for the three panelists. What if the proxy advisor have an against opinion to my AGM proposal? What should we do in the next step to have a better outcome?
Okay, so you mean is like specifically is that if we see the ISIS report and the Glass-Lewis report and we just found they have against the recommendation, right. So what the company have to do in the first step, okay? John.
Obviously, I don't work for Glass-Lewis, but I would say Glass-Lewis will publish their guidelines for each region. So have a look at the guidelines and see how it matches up with what you're doing. in order to understand that.
Tony
will probably have more than I will.
Yeah. What I would say is don't be in that position. You do a lot of risk assessment prior to your AGM with Glass Lewis and with ISS Research. They don't always go strictly by policy. And there may be nuance, say if it's director tenure. If the company can create a compelling case, even though the board nominee is over-tenured, they'll still get a 4 recommendation. And these recommendations are important, by the way. Of course, we run all the math. 93% of the time, foreign shareholders vote in alignment with the proxy advisors. The remaining 7% are usually cases where they vote against, but the shareholders still vote for based on custom policy or advisory guidance that they get. So for an against recommendation, those are hard to flip around. What you should have, first of all, is that risk assessment, and that risk assessment will tell you if you're going to fail. And then what you should have in hand is a communication plan to go to your shareholders and get them to vote with you to begin with. But as John said, and Shannon, know the policy, determine your own level of risk, and then have a plan to mitigate that should you get an against recommendation.
And also, at least from a Glass Lewis perspective, reach out to them, ask them why, talk to them about it, because they may not share the exact report, but they'll actually talk to you about what the issues they would see they have with you.
Right. So Shannon, you want to add on?
I think the only other part I would add is, obviously, I think what Tony said, don't be in that situation. So if you do understand, it's usually not a surprise for some of the basic proposals because both Glass Lewis and ISS are very clear about what they require in terms of disclosure. So the number one thing is disclose more information. So you really need to disclose, usually in Taiwan the issues would be you didn't disclose, restricted, if it's a restricted talk issue, you didn't disclose enough information. If it's releasing the directors from competitive, you didn't disclose which directors and why they need to be released. So it's usually just an issue in Taiwan about more disclosure. Now, if you do get an against, then you can go to your shareholders. And generally, I'd say the corporate governance people are open to, if you send more information, you do have communication, you explain why, and you show that you're going to actually make changes. They will be supportive sometimes, and they will vote. They can be supportive and still vote for you. So it's not the end, but yeah, try not to be there in the first place.
Right, and also I want to add on is that if you get that kind of against the report, it's already pretty close to your AGM because ISS and the Glass, they issue their report usually it's 2 weeks ahead of your AGM meeting, right? So when you realize that and you want to initiate some communication with your shareholder, probably everything is true in the urgent cases, right? So probably, the outcome could be also quite limited on that part, okay? Is there any other questions from audience? Okay. If no, I think we just stop here for this session. So our time is also here. So thanks again for the panelists for today's sharing. It's very, very informative. Thank you then again. Thank you, everyone.